March 3rd, 1944. East Anglia, England. Lieutenant William Overeat sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the letter in his hand. The words were meant for Virginia, for the woman he loved, but tonight they barely made sense. His mind was elsewhere, hovering over the endless fields illuminated by floodlights where ground crews worked silently, attaching what looked like nothing more than oversized cardboard tubes under the wings of his P-51 Mustang. Tomorrow, he would fly all the way to Berlin and back, an impossible mission by every measure the brass could quote. Yet there they were, paper tanks, wrapped carefully in brown craft, promising to hold fuel just long enough to defy the limits of distance, physics, and conventional military wisdom. Overeat's hand trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility. Every mission carried a name, a face, a story. Every drop of fuel meant a chance at survival. The planes hummed under the mechanic's touch, a symphony of preparation and precision. Somewhere between hope and skepticism, innovation had arrived in the most unassuming form. Laminated paper and resin, materials so ordinary they could be found in a newspaper plant, were about to change the course of the air war. The question wasn't whether the tanks would work. The question was whether men would dare to fly them across enemy skies, to test the limits of courage and technology simultaneously. And that's exactly what they would do. If you think innovation is only about advanced machines or exotic materials, think again. Sometimes the simplest ideas, crafted with care, executed with precision, become the weapons that change history. Stay with us, because what you're about to discover will redefine how you see courage, ingenuity, and the power of ordinary things achieving extraordinary results. March 3rd, 1944. East Anglia, England. The chill of pre-dawn wrapped the Debden airfield like a shroud. Lieutenant William Overeat walked slowly along the tarmac, each step crunching against the frost-hardened ground. His P-51 Mustang gleamed under the faint glow of floodlights, wings bristling with the latest innovation in aerial warfare, two 108-gallon paper drop tanks. They looked absurd, oversized cardboard tubes painted silver, almost fragile under the weight of expectation. Yet, in their simplicity lay a promise, the promise of reaching Berlin and returning without the escort that had once seemed impossible. Inside the briefing tent, tension was palpable. Captain Donald Blakesley addressed the pilots of the 334th, 335th, and 336 Squadrons. His voice was calm but firm. "Gentlemen, tomorrow we make history. These tanks are our ticket to Berlin. They're not just containers, they're lifelines. Treat them with respect, and they'll take you there and back. Fail to understand them, and the consequences are yours to bear." The pilots nodded, faces a mixture of awe, fear, and determination. Every word hung in the air, heavy with expectation. Outside, ground crews moved like clockwork. Mechanics carefully mounted the tanks onto pylons, checking seals and quick-release mechanisms. Each tank, constructed from laminated paper soaked in resin, was pressure-tested to 6 psi and coated with heat-resistant lacquer. The process was meticulous, a marriage of craftsmanship and science. One wrong fold, one poorly sealed seam, and a Mustang could become a fiery tomb over German skies. Yet the crews worked with steady hands, honed by months of preparation, knowing that every perfectly fitted tank meant a life preserved. Meanwhile, over the English countryside, the ghost of Black Thursday lingered. October 14th, 1943. The day the 8th Air Force had lost 60 B-17s in a single mission to Schweinfurt. Hundreds of men gone, bombers shredded, dreams of victory haunted by the ruthless efficiency of Luftwaffe fighters. Technical Sergeant Robert Morgan's words still echoed in officers' minds. The Jerrys waited until we turned back at Aachen, then struck in waves. Head-on attacks, rockets from twin-engine fighters outside our gun range. We were sitting ducks for 3 hours. That memory wasn't just a statistic, it was a warning. Without range, every daylight bombing mission could end in disaster. Colonel Cass Howe had labored for months to solve this problem. Together with British engineers, he developed what seemed improbable: fuel tanks made of paper, glue, and resin, produced in converted newspaper plants. The material was lightweight, resilient, and, most importantly, allowed fighters to carry double the previous fuel load. Where metal tanks weighed 150 pounds empty, these paper tanks weighed only 50. That difference translated to hundreds of extra miles in the air, a tangible, measurable edge. Pilots like Overeat felt the significance in their bones. Flying the Mustang with these tanks wasn't just about speed or maneuverability. It was about survival, strategy, and a chance to tip the scales of an air war that had seemed unwinnable. Captain Don Gentile, who had only 45 minutes of flight time in the Mustang, shared a quiet laugh with Overeat, the kind born of nerves and defiance. "You feel it yet?" Gentile asked. "That nervous energy in your gut. That's history being written under your wings." As night fell, the crews finished inspections. Overeat returned to his quarters, letter in hand, thoughts drifting between Virginia and the impending mission. He knew the tanks would only hold fuel for about 5 hours before the resin began to degrade. 5 hours to reach Berlin, punch off the tanks, and return home. Every calculation, every diagram, every test culminated in this moment. And yet, in the quiet, there was more than fear. There was anticipation. There was pride. There was the quiet thrill of participating in something that could change the air war forever. The morning of March 4th arrived crisp and clear. Pilots lined up their Mustangs, engines roaring like unleashed beasts, the silver paper tanks gleaming under the sun. Major John McCulpin, intelligence officer, pulled back the curtain on the mission map. A red ribbon stretched across Europe, from East Anglia to Berlin and back. For the first time, single-engine fighters would escort heavy bombers to the enemy capital, defying all previous assumptions of range and endurance. Overeat climbed into his cockpit, the paper tanks strapped firmly beneath his wings. The fuel lines connected seamlessly, the quick-release levers within reach of his gloved hands. He adjusted his goggles, took a deep breath, and checked his instruments. Around him, other pilots prepared similarly, a chorus of nervous energy and steely determination. When the signal was given, the Mustangs surged forward, engines screaming in unison, and lifted into the English sky. As they flew eastward, clouds streaking past, Overeat marveled at the quiet miracle beneath him. These tanks, so simple, so seemingly fragile, were the culmination of countless hours of innovation, testing, and human effort. Each was a testament to ingenuity, to the ability of ordinary men and women to solve extraordinary problems. From Beauauteloid's converted newspaper plants to the homes and workshops of British workers, the chain of effort spanned an ocean, a war, and countless lives. By the time they reached the first waypoint, every pilot knew the paper tanks had performed flawlessly. The Mustang's extended range allowed them to press forward where thunderbolts would have turned back. They were no longer constrained by geography, by enemy lines, by limits of metal and machinery. They were flying on possibility itself, fueled by human ingenuity and the simplest of materials. Tomorrow, Berlin. Today, they tested the promise of paper, resin, and courage. And every pilot, mechanic, and factory worker who had contributed to this mission shared in the triumph, whether they ever saw the skies themselves or not. If you believe innovation requires complexity or exotic technology, think again. Sometimes, the simplest idea, executed with precision and courage, can change the course of history. Watch closely, because this is just the beginning of a story that will redefine what's possible. February 1944. In a modest office at the 8th Air Force Technical Section at Bovington, Colonel Cashow leaned over a cluttered desk, eyes tracing diagrams and calculations. On the table lay a stack of what looked like nothing more than oversized cardboard tubes, meticulously laminated and coated in a silver sheen. These were the paper drop tanks, the most improbable solution to one of the war's most urgent problems: how to extend the range of single-engine fighters to escort bombers deep into Germany. Every detail had been accounted for, from weight and capacity to heat tolerance and aerodynamic efficiency. The first tests had been a mixture of skepticism and cautious optimism. Major James Goodson led the initial missions with P-47 Thunderbolts, flying sorties to Hanover with the British-manufactured tanks. His combat report, later preserved in the 56 Fighter Group archives, was unequivocal. The tanks performed flawlessly. 5 hours of flight, hundreds of miles, and not a single leak or malfunction. The breakthrough was simple, almost laughably so. Where metal tanks were heavy, slow, and prone to catastrophic failure if struck by enemy fire, paper tanks were light, aerodynamic, and designed to tear safely if hit. Yet the achievement was not merely technical. It was logistical, social, and psychological. In Sittingbourne and Kemsley, the converted newspaper plants hummed with activity. Women, many of them trained only in printing and packaging, now laminated paper, shaped cylinders, applied resin coatings, and painted tank silver. The work was precise, almost artisanal, yet carried out at an industrial scale. Distributed manufacturing extended the effort into workshops and homes across Britain. Every tank produced was a lifeline. Every seam sealed a small act of heroism that no pilot would ever witness firsthand. Back in England, pilots were absorbing the reality of this innovation. Captain Don Gentile, barely acquainted with his Mustang, had flown his first test sortie with the new tanks. The aircraft handled differently, lighter at takeoff, more responsive in climbs and turns. The real advantage, however, was psychological. For the first time, they could fly with confidence that fuel would last to the target and back. That confidence would make the difference between life and death over enemy skies. In the technical briefing rooms, engineers explained the tank's construction to skeptical American observers. Layers of craft paper, impregnated with phenolic resin, wrapped around cylindrical wooden forms, internal anti-slush baffles to prevent fuel surge, nose and tail cones laminated from hand-shaped gores. A lacquer coating provided fire resistance and environmental protection, while aluminum paint ensured visibility for inspection and identification. The meticulous attention to detail was remarkable for a material often dismissed as disposable. The skepticism from right-field technical experts was predictable. Paper tanks will not hold, they said. Fuel will dissolve the glue. Seams will fail. Pilots will crash. Yet every mission flown proved them wrong. By March 1944, over 1,500 tanks had been deployed in test sorties, and not a single failure was attributed to tank construction. The innovation was not only working, it was outperforming expectations. Meanwhile, the human stories continued to unfold. Lieutenant William Overeat, having completed his first Berlin mission, wrote again to Virginia, this time describing the tanks in awe rather than disbelief. He detailed how the Mustang climbed effortlessly once the tanks were released near the initial point, how pilots engaged enemy fighters with renewed confidence, and how the psychological impact on both sides of the Atlantic was immediate. German pilots, confronted by American fighters appearing over Berlin, could not comprehend the extension of range. Their intelligence had insisted it was impossible. At the factory floor, women and men continued to refine the production process. Pressure tests, adhesive formulas, and laminate thicknesses were constantly evaluated and improved. Feedback from the air, data on leaks, fuel consumption, handling, circulated back to engineers, creating a closed loop of innovation that accelerated rapidly. By late February, the 334th, 335th, and 336 squadrons were ready to transition fully from P-47 Thunderbolts to P-51 Mustangs, each equipped with the new tanks. Less than 24 hours were allotted for pilots to adjust, and yet the combination of machine and material proved transformative. The first escort missions to Berlin on March 4th were tense but historic. Overeat and his squadron led Mustangs in formation, supporting over 700 heavy bombers on a 1,100-mile round trip. The tanks performed beyond expectation, extending range to 850 miles, allowing single-engine fighters to provide continuous protection where it had never before been possible. In a small observation post, Colonel Blakesley recorded notes that would later become part of the official after-action report. The tanks enabled air dominance over the enemy capital for the first time in history. Even the Germans recognized the change, though incompletely. Luftwaffe intelligence noted American fighters appearing over previously unreachable territory. Their defensive strategy, based on concentric layers of airfields and predictable ranges, was suddenly obsolete. For the bomber crews, the sight of Mustangs overhead was transformative, a reassurance that they were no longer exposed to the relentless attacks that had plagued missions in late 1943. Every tank carried a human story, from the factory worker who laminated the paper to the pilot who released it mid-air. Master Sergeant Donald Manor, in charge of logistics for the 357th Fighter Group, kept detailed records of deployment, mounting, and release. His meticulous notes demonstrated not just reliability, but the elegance of the system. Tanks attached to bomb shackles, quick-release levers, fuel feed integrated seamlessly, and redundancy built in to ensure safety even if one tank failed. The lesson of Part 2 was clear. Ingenuity need not be complex to be revolutionary. The collaboration of engineers, factory workers, pilots, and commanders, each performing their role with precision, produced a tactical advantage that changed the trajectory of the air war. Paper tanks, once dismissed as impractical, had proven themselves as decisive tools, saving lives and enabling operations that had previously been impossible. If you think innovation is about complexity or high technology, look closer. Sometimes the simplest, most human solutions, executed at scale, have the power to rewrite history. Watch closely, because the next part will reveal how these tanks move from experimental to indispensable, changing the strategic landscape of Europe forever. March 4th, 1944. Dawn broke over Debdon with a pale, icy light. Lieutenant William Overeat climbed into his Mustang, the two silver 108-gallon paper drop tanks glinting under the weak sun. Around him, the hum of engines, the shouts of ground crews, and the low murmur of pilots performing final checks created a symphony of anticipation. Today was more than a mission. It was a test of human ingenuity, courage, and the fragile genius of paper and resin. The briefing room had been electric the night before. Maps of Germany spread across tables, red ribbons marking the route to Berlin, dotted lines indicating Luftwaffe positions, and circles noting anti-aircraft emplacements. Major John McCulpin emphasized precision. These tanks will get you there and back. Once you hit the initial point, jettison the tanks, engage enemy fighters, and protect our bombers. Every detail counts. Pilots leaned over maps, tracing routes with fingers, memorizing waypoints, mentally rehearsing every maneuver. The combination of nerves and determination made the room almost reverent. As the Mustangs lifted off, Overeat felt the aircraft respond differently than any he had flown before. The tanks, light yet resilient, allowed him to climb faster, turn tighter, and hold formation with the bombers without overtaxing the engines. The first hours were tense. Clouds obscured the horizon. German flak batteries lurked below, and the faint hum of enemy aircraft could be heard over distant frequencies. Yet the tanks performed flawlessly. Fuel transfer remained seamless, pressure steady, and the resin-coated paper resisted both temperature extremes and vibrations. Flying over the North Sea, Overeat marveled at the audacity of the plan. Just months ago, Berlin had seemed unreachable to single-engine fighters. Now, with a combination of innovation and discipline, it was within their grasp. Every pilot in the formation carried the weight of history, aware that this mission could redefine the air war over Europe. For bomber crews, the sight of Mustangs overhead was transformative. Ball turret gunners craned their necks to see the silver tanks, realizing that protection had finally arrived where it mattered most. The first encounter with enemy aircraft was abrupt. Over Berlin, Luftwaffe fighters attacked in disciplined waves. Overeat's squadron jettisoned their tanks at the initial point, immediately gaining maneuverability. He engaged a FW-190, remembering the lessons drilled in practice missions. The paper tanks, released safely, fell harmlessly below, their simple design preventing catastrophic explosion or fire. He shot down one enemy fighter, narrowly avoided another, and felt a surge of adrenaline tempered by the knowledge that thousands of bomber lives depended on his precision. Meanwhile, back at Bowata Lloyd, production continued uninterrupted. Workers, mostly women, trained in newspaper lamination and packaging, had adapted to the new reality of wartime production. Each tank was a product of meticulous labor, layers of impregnated craft paper wrapped with precision, coated in resin, reinforced with baffles to prevent fuel surges, and tested to survive extreme temperatures. The factory hummed with efficiency, aware that every tank produced extended the reach of Allied fighters and protected thousands of lives. By March 6th, reports of the first Berlin mission filtered back. Losses were minimal compared to previous unescorted bombing raids. Overeat's flight log recorded details. Fuel levels remained stable, tanks jettisoned cleanly, and aircraft performance improved after release. Pilots were exhilarated. Mechanics celebrated the reliability of the tanks, and commanders recognized that a strategic turning point had been achieved. The psychological impact on the Luftwaffe was immediate. German pilots, expecting to dominate the skies over their capital, were confronted with an unprecedented sight: American fighters appearing far beyond their previous operational reach. The ingenuity of the paper tanks extended beyond the cockpit. Logistics officers documented how the tanks simplified supply chains. Flattened for transport, they occupied a fraction of the space of metal tanks. Forward airfields in France and Belgium could be stocked quickly, allowing fighter groups to maintain operational tempo without reliance on extended ground supply lines. The lightweight design meant less stress on aircraft pylons and improved overall performance, while the non-metallic construction minimized the risk of catastrophic explosions if hit by enemy fire. Human stories continued to emerge. Technical Sergeant Robert Morgan, who had survived Black Thursday in Schweinfurt, observed the Escort flights with a mixture of awe and relief. Finally, he thought, our bombers have a chance. Lieutenant Alan Bont, who would later fall to flak near Brandenburg, had flown with meticulous care, trusting the tanks entirely. Each pilot understood that success depended not only on their skill, but also on the precision of thousands of hands on the ground: workers, engineers, and mechanics, each contributing to a fragile yet powerful chain of innovation. By March 10th, the results were clear. Bombing missions with long-range fighter escort had become more efficient, less costly in human life, and psychologically demoralizing for the enemy. Reports indicated a sharp decrease in Luftwaffe interceptions and improved bomber accuracy. The combination of P-51 Mustangs and paper tanks had fundamentally altered the strategic landscape. Where once range had dictated engagement and retreat, pilots now dictated the terms of battle. The success of these missions illuminated a larger truth. Innovation in war does not always come from advanced metallurgy or complex machinery. Sometimes, it arises from the clever application of ordinary materials, careful observation, and disciplined execution. Laminated paper, resin, and ingenuity had achieved what thousands of pages of technical reports and budgets could not, extending human capability beyond expected limits. The lesson is clear. Courage, precision, and a relentless pursuit of simple yet effective solutions can achieve extraordinary outcomes. Every paper tank carried the labor, expertise, and hope of thousands, a reminder that innovation is as much about people as it is about materials. Stay with us. The next chapter will reveal the full impact of these missions, including the response from German forces, the transformation of strategic bombing campaigns, and the human stories of triumph and sacrifice that emerge from this audacious approach. March 1944. Over East Anglia, the early morning mist clung to the airfield, wrapping the Mustangs in a thin, ghostly veil. Lieutenant William Overeat climbed into his cockpit, adjusting his goggles and checking instruments. The silver paper tanks beneath his wings reflected the rising sun, a reminder that these fragile-looking cylinders were more than mere containers. They were instruments of strategy, a marriage of human ingenuity and necessity. Today, like many missions before, he would fly beyond what had once been considered impossible. The transformation of the 8th Air Force's capabilities was staggering. Before the introduction of long-range paper drop tanks, bomber losses had been catastrophic. Black Thursday remained etched in memory. 60 B-17s downed in a single mission, crews decimated, hopes of sustained daylight bombing hanging by a thread. Now, thanks to the paper tanks, that narrative had shifted. Pilots could escort bombers deep into German territory, providing protection that previously seemed unreachable. With each successful sortie, confidence grew, and with it, the operational tempo accelerated. On March 12th, Overeat and his squadron flew another Berlin-bound mission. The journey northeast, past familiar points over the North Sea and into Germany, was tense but methodical. The tanks performed flawlessly, carrying fuel precisely as calculated, allowing the pilots to engage enemy aircraft with full mobility after jettisoning the tanks at the initial point. The Luftwaffe was caught off guard. Their defensive strategy, based on the predictable range of Allied fighters, was suddenly irrelevant. German pilots, trained to anticipate American flight paths, now encountered Mustangs where none were expected, disrupting formations and sowing confusion among anti-aircraft batteries. Meanwhile, behind the lines, the production network that supported these missions was a marvel of industrial coordination. Bowatt Lloyd's converted newspaper plants in Sittingbourne, and Kemsley operated in 3 shifts, producing hundreds of tanks weekly. Quality control was rigorous. Layers of craft paper, resin impregnation, anti-slush baffles, lacquer coating, and precise end caps ensured that each tank could withstand extreme temperature ranges and 3 gs of acceleration. Distributed manufacturing supplemented these efforts, with skilled workers in home workshops contributing to the war effort. Every tank represented countless hours of labor, knowledge, and human ingenuity. The impact on the bomber crews was profound. Ball turret gunners, tail gunners, and pilots alike watched Mustangs swoop overhead, silver tanks gleaming, knowing that protection had arrived where it was needed most. Sergeant Dale Rice of the 100th Bomb Group later recalled in debriefings that the presence of P-51s over Berlin transformed morale. You could see them coming, and for the first time, you felt safe enough to focus on the mission, not just survival, he said. The psychological effect was undeniable, both for the Americans and for the Germans, who struggled to adapt to the sudden extension of Allied reach. In April 1944, the Luftwaffe began to realize the strategic implications of this innovation. Technical intelligence reports noted that American fighters now operated hundreds of miles deeper than previously believed possible. Attempts to intercept bombers over Berlin were increasingly futile. German pilots were forced to disperse, leaving fewer experienced aviators at critical points of defense. Even when they managed to engage, the superior range and maneuverability provided by the paper tanks gave American pilots decisive advantages. For Overeat, each mission was a blend of skill, discipline, and reliance on the invisible army of engineers and factory workers whose efforts had made the impossible possible. After releasing his tanks over Brandenburg during one sortie, he felt the difference immediately. The Mustang, lighter and more responsive, could climb sharply, dodge enemy fire, and press the attack. The tank's ingenious simplicity, laminated paper, resin, and precise construction translated directly into survival, maneuverability, and combat effectiveness. The innovation also had unexpected operational benefits. Paper tanks were lighter than their metal counterparts, reducing drag and improving fuel efficiency. They were less likely to explode if struck by enemy fire, instead tearing harmlessly and minimizing risk to the pilot. Logistical advantages were significant as well. Flattened for transport, they occupied a fraction of the space required by metal tanks, allowing airfields to stock more fuel and supply forward-deployed units more efficiently. By April, the combination of extended range, reliability, and logistical efficiency had transformed the operational landscape for the Allies. German high command, confronted with the reality of these missions, struggled to respond. Fighter bases and defensive rings, meticulously planned for months, were rendered obsolete almost overnight. Luftwaffe pilots, including aces like Oberleutnant Heinznach, recorded shock in diaries. American fighters were operating far beyond previously understood limits. The sudden appearance of Mustangs over Berlin undermined morale, disrupted coordination, and forced German pilots to fly in unpredictable patterns, often away from the locations where they could effectively intercept bombers. On the ground in England, commanders and engineers continued to refine the system. New formulations of resin extended the tank's usable fuel time, reducing pre-mission preparation stress for mechanics and improving mission reliability. Incremental improvements, such as enhanced cold weather performance and better pressure tolerance, ensured that tanks remained functional across the full spectrum of operational conditions. The continuous feedback loop between pilots, engineers, and factory workers accelerated these enhancements, demonstrating how close collaboration between frontline operations and manufacturing could drive revolutionary outcomes. By the end of April, the results were undeniable. Bomber losses had dropped dramatically, and American fighters were conducting missions deep into Germany with a reliability and reach that had been unimaginable months earlier. The strategic landscape of the European air war had shifted decisively. What had begun as a small, experimental solution, laminated paper and resin tanks, had grown into a system that redefined operational strategy, psychological warfare, and logistical planning simultaneously. The story of the paper tanks was not only one of technology, but of human ingenuity, collaboration, and daring. From Boat Lloyd's workers to Overeat in the cockpit, every participant played a critical role. The tank's simplicity masked the sophisticated understanding of materials, aerodynamics, and operational needs that had gone into their design. The combination of innovative thinking, disciplined execution, and relentless testing created a tool that changed the course of history. The lesson is clear. Innovation does not always come from complexity or the most advanced materials. Sometimes, it comes from the careful observation of a problem, creative application of simple resources, and the collective effort of people dedicated to achieving a shared goal. The paper drop tanks exemplify how practical ingenuity, executed at scale, can achieve extraordinary results. Stay with us. The next part will reveal the pivotal missions that cemented air superiority, including first major losses, tactical brilliance in combat, and the full operational integration of paper tanks into the Allied strategy over Europe. May 1944. The European sky had become a theater of relentless innovation and daring, with paper drop tanks silently shifting the balance of power. Lieutenant William Overeat and his fellow pilots of the 8th Air Force now operated in an environment unrecognizable from the winter of 1943. The strategic bombing campaign, once hampered by catastrophic losses and the limited reach of single-engine fighters, was now a coordinated symphony of precision, protection, and tactical audacity. The first weeks of May saw the expansion of escort missions deeper into Germany. Overeat flew sorties over industrial cities, rail hubs, and airfields previously unreachable by fighters. The silver paper tanks beneath his wings carried the promise of extended range, reliable fuel, and enhanced maneuverability once jettisoned. On May 6th, during a mission over Magdeburg, Overeat recalled the moment when he released his tanks. The Mustang, suddenly lighter, responded with astonishing agility, allowing him to outmaneuver an attacking FW-190 and protect the bombers below. Every successful engagement reinforced a lesson that was becoming central to Allied doctrine. The combination of engineering ingenuity and human skill could change the outcome of air campaigns. Meanwhile, German responses were growing increasingly desperate. Luftwaffe intelligence, still struggling to comprehend the sudden appearance of American fighters hundreds of miles from their expected operational range, issued reports warning of long-range escort. They attempted to reposition fighter groups, but the speed and flexibility of American Mustangs made these maneuvers largely ineffective. Even elite German pilots, many with hundreds of missions under their belts, found themselves at a disadvantage, unable to anticipate the new operational reach. Back at WWII, production continued at a fevered pace. Workers, many women who had never handled tools beyond presses and laminators, now manufactured hundreds of tanks weekly, each subjected to rigorous quality control. The process was deceptively simple. Layers of craft paper soaked in phenolic resin, molded into cylinders, reinforced with internal baffles, lacquered for protection, and painted silver for identification. Yet the simplicity belied the sophistication behind the design. Precise weight distribution, temperature tolerance from -60 degrees Fahrenheit to +120 degrees Fahrenheit, and the ability to withstand up to 3 gs of acceleration. Each tank was tested, approved, and then shipped to forward airfields, ready to extend the reach of American air power. June 1944 marked a critical turning point. With D-Day imminent, the importance of extended-range fighter operations could not be overstated. Paper-drop tanks allowed Mustangs and P-47s to cover the invasion forces, suppress enemy air activity, and disrupt reinforcements moving toward Normandy. Pilots like Overeat flew multiple missions daily, each sortie testing the limits of endurance, skill, and the technology under their wings. Reports from forward airfields highlighted the efficiency of the system. Tanks could be mounted and filled in under 20 minutes, allowing squadrons to launch successive sorties with minimal downtime. The human element remained as vital as the engineering. Mechanics, quartermasters, and engineers worked tirelessly alongside pilots, ensuring that each tank performed flawlessly. Master Sergeant Donald Manner's meticulous logs tracked every deployment, maintenance check, and flight outcome. These records revealed patterns, informed improvements, and created a feedback loop that transformed operational procedures into a finely tuned system. Pilots trusted this chain implicitly. Their lives depended on it. July 1944 brought intense air operations over France and Germany, with Mustangs ranging farther than ever before. Overeat's squadron participated in a mission over the Ruhr Valley, where German industrial output was critical to the war effort. The tanks allowed the fighters to escort bombers through heavily defended airspace, engaging enemy aircraft and providing a protective umbrella that drastically reduced bomber losses. The Luftwaffe, confronted with the unprecedented reach of American fighters, struggled to mount coordinated defenses. Pilots reported encounters with inexperienced replacements, hastily trained and outmatched by veterans operating with extended-range Mustangs. The impact of paper tanks was measurable in stark numbers. Prior to their introduction, the 8th Air Force experienced loss rates in the range of 7 to 20% per mission, with bomber crews facing near constant peril. By mid-1944, with consistent long-range escort, losses dropped to 1.5 to 2.2%. Thousands of lives were saved, and strategic bombing became a sustainable, effective tool. The combination of extended range, reliable tanks, and tactical skill allowed pilots to shift from defensive escort to proactive sweeps, targeting Luftwaffe airfields, rail lines, and production facilities, further crippling the enemy's ability to respond. Yet the victories were not without cost. On July 18th, Captain Donald Bryan of the 352nd Fighter Group experienced one of the rare failures in his tanks, a leak at 25,000 feet over Hanover. Quick thinking allowed him to switch to the starboard tank and complete the mission with fuel to spare, demonstrating the built-in redundancy and careful design of the system. Even when failures occurred, the consequences were mitigated by engineering foresight and pilot skill. As summer deepened, the psychological impact of the paper tank program became undeniable. German civilian and military morale suffered under the constant presence of American fighters deep within previously secure territory. Letters and diaries later captured in Allied intelligence revealed a sense of disbelief and frustration. The sky that had once belonged to them was now dominated by an invisible, relentless force. For American pilots, the tanks symbolized both protection and empowerment, a tangible manifestation of ingenuity, allowing them to fight beyond previously imagined limits. The story of the paper tanks also highlighted the ingenuity of Allied industrial cooperation. British knowledge of resin and laminated paper, combined with American logistical capacity, created a system that was simple yet profoundly effective. The tanks were cheap to produce, easily transported, and highly adaptable to operational conditions. Every plane equipped with them became a tool of strategic leverage, and every pilot's success reinforced the broader campaign objectives. The lesson is unmistakable. Innovation is not always about invention. It is about application. Paper, resin, and human ingenuity, when coordinated at scale, can rewrite history. Every tank deployed, every sortie completed, and every mission survived was a testament to the power of practical, scalable solutions. Stay with us. The next part will reveal the climactic moments that secured air supremacy, the final battles over Germany, and the enduring legacy of paper drop tanks, an unassuming but decisive factor in the Allied victory. August 1944. The skies over Europe had become a proving ground for ingenuity, courage, and relentless determination. For Lieutenant William Overeat and his fellow pilots, every sortie carried the weight of history. The paper drop tanks beneath their wings, once dismissed as fragile and improbable, were now essential instruments of victory. These unassuming cylinders, composed of laminated paper and resin, had transformed the European air war, extending the reach of fighters and reshaping the strategic landscape. The months following D-Day were marked by relentless missions across France, Belgium, and Germany. Mustangs equipped with paper tanks provided continuous escort to bombers, suppressing enemy fighters and attacking critical infrastructure. The tanks allowed flights to range hundreds of miles beyond traditional limits, turning previously unreachable targets into opportunities for disruption and control. For the pilots, the tanks were both a lifeline and a weapon. Once jettisoned, they enhanced maneuverability, allowing agile engagement with enemy aircraft and rapid adaptation to combat conditions. July through September saw significant operational and psychological victories. German pilots, facing unprecedented aerial reach, struggled to mount effective defense. Inexperienced replacements filled ranks depleted by attrition, and airfields once secure became vulnerable to sweeping fighter attacks. Captain Robert Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group, flying with paper tanks, reported loitering over enemy positions for extended periods, striking supply lines, and disrupting reinforcements during critical operations. Each mission illustrated the tangible benefits of this innovation. Lives saved, missions completed, and the enemy's operational tempo broken. Meanwhile, back in England, production and logistics continued to evolve. Lloyd's factories, along with distributed workshops, maintained a relentless supply of tanks. Workers, often women who had transitioned from newspaper production to wartime manufacturing, became essential to the Allied effort. Each tank represented meticulous craftsmanship, layers of resin-impregnated paper, precision baffles, and rigorous testing ensured reliability under extreme conditions. By mid-1944, production had scaled to equip the entire Allied fighter force in Northern Europe, sustaining the tempo of operations during the most critical phases of the war. The strategic significance was clear. Loss rates for bombers dropped dramatically, from catastrophic percentages in 1943 to sustainable levels by mid-1944. Thousands of lives were saved, and a long-range fighter escort became a cornerstone of Allied doctrine. Pilots like Overeat could now engage in proactive sweeps, destroying Luftwaffe airfields, rail yards, and production facilities. The German response was limited. Material shortages dispersed airfields, and attrition meant they could not effectively counter the extended reach of American fighters. The final months of the war highlighted the extraordinary impact of paper tanks. In December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, forward airfields were quickly resupplied with lightweight, compact paper tanks. Fighters launched successive missions with minimal downtime, disrupting German movements and providing continuous air support to ground forces. By March 1945, Mustangs escorted reconnaissance missions over southern Germany and Czechoslovakia, extending range to 1,400 miles in some cases. Lieutenant Robert Powell flew multiple sorties with the tanks, demonstrating their flexibility, reliability, and operational importance. On April 25, 1945, Mustangs of the 357 Fighter Group flew a final patrol over Hitler's mountain retreat. Paper tanks carried them there and back, symbolizing the extraordinary union of engineering, human effort, and tactical genius. The Luftwaffe, by then shattered, could only watch as Allied fighters dominated skies they once controlled. The tanks, deceptively simple in appearance, had rewritten the rules of aerial warfare. German officers, including captured senior personnel, acknowledged the devastating impact of extended-range fighters, noting that their entire defensive strategy had become obsolete. The post-war legacy of paper drop tanks extended far beyond the battlefield. Industrial techniques, including precision lamination and quality control, influenced post-war manufacturing in aviation, electronics, and consumer goods. Workers trained in the construction of paper tanks applied their skills to architectural components, aircraft interiors, and aerospace materials. The principle of disposable, lightweight, and effective solutions continued to inform military design, from auxiliary fuel tanks to sensor pods, for decades. The human dimension remained central to the story. Thousands of men and women, from factory workers to pilots, contributed to a collective achievement that reshaped the war. Each paper tank represented a life saved, a mission protected, and a step closer to victory. Veterans later recounted these stories at reunions, remembering how something as simple as compressed paper and resin had carried them over enemy lines, enabling them to fight, survive, and win. Lieutenant General William Kepner, commander of the 8th Fighter Command, later testified to Congress. Without these tanks, bomber losses would have remained catastrophic. Without them, our fighters could not have dominated the Luftwaffe. Without them, D-Day and the liberation of Europe might have faltered. By May 7, 1945, as V-Day approached, the paper drop tanks had fulfilled their mission. Mustangs flew final patrols over liberated territories, dropping tanks over fields near Prague, a testament to their enduring reliability and adaptability. The war in Europe had been won not solely by superior aircraft, but by superior range, achievable through innovation, collaboration, and practical problem-solving. The Allied air campaign had transformed the sky into a space where ingenuity triumphed over expectation. The lesson is timeless. Innovation is not always about creating the newest or most complex technology. Sometimes, it is about applying simple materials in clever ways, leveraging human skill, and executing with precision at scale. Laminated paper and resin, newspaper factories repurposed for war production, and disciplined pilots combined to achieve a strategic effect greater than any one component alone. The paper drop tank stands as a symbol of the power of practical innovation to save lives, shift strategy, and change history. Take this lesson into your own life and work. Look for the problems others declare impossible. Seek solutions in overlooked materials, simple strategies, and the expertise of those around you. Innovation thrives where creativity meets discipline. Just as paper and resin changed the course of history, your ingenuity, applied with courage and consistency, can transform the challenges in front of you. Every small idea executed well has the power to save, to protect, and to achieve results that once seemed unreachable.